September 23, 1944. A grey stone building in Zossen, south of Berlin. The compound housed the nerve centre of German army logistics planning, where Colonel Heinrich von Lüttwitz sat surrounded by documents that should have been impossible. Before him lay captured American supply manifests from the Normandy beachhead, stamped and authenticated by multiple intelligence sources. The numbers printed in neat columns represented something that violated every principle of military logistics he had learned in 30 years of service. Von Lüttwitz was not given to panic. His family had served Prussia for generations, and he had personally overseen the logistics for the invasion of Poland, the conquest of France, and 3 years of operations on the Eastern Front. He understood supply chains the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Every army, he knew, had limits defined by mathematics. Fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, food requirements, replacement parts, medical supplies. These were constants that could be calculated, predicted, controlled. The Americans, according to these documents, were operating outside those constants. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Across the desk sat Major Klaus Reinhardt, a logistics officer who had spent the previous week verifying the captured papers. His face carried the expression of a man who had checked his calculations repeatedly and found them correct each time, despite desperately hoping for an error. He pushed a single sheet forward, his hand trembling slightly. "This is the August tonnage report from the Normandy lodgment," Reinhardt said quietly. "The Americans landed 4.2 million tons of supplies in that month alone." Von Lüttwitz studied the figure. He did not reach for his calculator. He did not need to. The German Army Group West, defending all of France with 3 armies totaling over 400,000 men, had received approximately 80,000 tons of supplies during the same period. The Americans were delivering 50 times more material to a smaller area for roughly the same number of troops. "This must be falsified," von Lüttwitz said, though his tone carried no conviction. It was a statement of hope rather than analysis. Reinhardt had anticipated this response. He pulled another document from his stack, this one a detailed breakdown of American port operations. They are unloading through 2 artificial harbours, the Mulberry installations, plus direct beach landings. British intelligence has confirmed the Mulberry construction. Each harbour can handle 7,000 tons daily at full capacity. Von Lüttwitz knew about the Mulberry harbours. German reconnaissance had photographed the enormous concrete caissons being towed across the English Channel in early June. The engineering required to build floating harbours the size of Dover had seemed impressive, even admirable in an abstract sense. But he had assumed they were emergency measures, temporary solutions, until the Allies captured a proper port. The idea that they could function at this scale, day after day, month after month, seemed to defy the laws of maritime logistics. "What about wastage?" von Lüttwitz asked. "These figures must include non-combat supplies, luxury items, redundant equipment." Reinhardt shook his head. "The breakdowns show standard military categories: fuel, ammunition, rations, vehicles, spare parts, construction materials. The proportions match doctrine. If anything, they appear to be understating certain categories." The 2 officers sat in silence, the captured documents spread between them like evidence of an impossible crime. Both men had spent the war managing logistics under conditions of perpetual scarcity. Every gallon of fuel had to be rationed. Every shell counted. Every replacement vehicle requested through channels that moved with glacial slowness. The idea of an army that could waste supplies, that could abandon equipment because repair was less convenient than replacement, belonged to fantasy rather than military reality. Yet the evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. The journey to this moment of cold understanding had begun 3 months earlier, though its roots extended back to fundamental miscalculations about American industrial capacity. The German High Command had tracked Allied invasion preparations throughout late 1943 and early 1944. Intelligence reports documented the massive build-up of troops and equipment in southern England. German reconnaissance flights photographed landing craft clustered in British ports. Agent networks reported training exercises and troop movements. None of this surprised German planners. An invasion was inevitable. What they failed to anticipate was the scale of logistical preparation behind it. The German understanding of military logistics was shaped by European experience. Armies fought within striking distance of their industrial bases. Supply lines stretched for hundreds of miles, not thousands. Ports and railways were mature infrastructure, developed over centuries. Even the Wehrmacht's most ambitious operations, the invasions of Poland and France, had been conducted within this familiar framework. Logistics were challenging, certainly, but fundamentally predictable. The American approach was different in ways German planners had not fully grasped. America was fighting a war across an ocean, 3,000 miles from its industrial heartland. Every bullet, every drop of fuel, every spare part had to cross the Atlantic under threat of submarine attack, then be landed on hostile shores without benefit of existing port facilities. The logistical challenge was unprecedented in military history. German intelligence officers, analyzing this situation in late 1943, had reached what seemed like reasonable conclusions. The Atlantic crossing alone would constrain American supply capacity. U-boats, despite recent setbacks, could still sink substantial tonnage. The lack of major French ports in Allied hands would create bottlenecks. The distance from supply bases would slow the tempo of operations. Winter weather would disrupt beach landings. These factors, German planners believed, would limit American combat power regardless of how much industrial capacity they possessed. An army that cannot be supplied cannot fight. The mathematics seemed straightforward. The first cracks in this assessment appeared within hours of the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944. German commanders observing the invasion beaches reported something unexpected. The scale of the landing was massive, yes, but more disturbing was the sheer quantity of vehicles and equipment coming ashore. Trucks by the thousands, artillery pieces lined up on the sand, supply dumps appearing faster than they could be targeted. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B defending Normandy, sent increasingly alarmed reports to high command. "The enemy build-up is proceeding at a rate we cannot match," he wrote on June 12. "Our counterattacks destroy individual units, but their overall strength continues to grow." This pattern is inconsistent with normal logistics constraints. These reports were noted but not fully comprehended at the highest levels. Hitler and his inner circle remained convinced that the invasion would be contained and eventually thrown back into the sea. They pointed to the Allied failure to capture a major port as evidence that logistics would soon strangle the landing. Cherbourg remained in German hands. Le Havre was demolished beyond immediate use. The Americans were stuck with beach landings, which everyone knew were terribly inefficient. The construction of the Mulberry harbours began to change this calculation. German intelligence first learned of these structures in early June through aerial reconnaissance. The photographs showed enormous concrete caissons, each the size of a 5-story building, being positioned off the Normandy coast. Metal piers extended to the shore. Floating roadways allowed trucks to drive directly from ships to land. The engineering was impressive, but German analysts initially dismissed the harbours as makeshift solutions with limited capacity. Artificial harbours were by definition inferior to real ports. The structures would be vulnerable to weather. Unloading capacity would be restricted. It was clever improvisation, but not a solution to the fundamental logistics problem. By late June, this assessment was proving catastrophically wrong. The Mulberry harbours were functioning far better than German intelligence had predicted. They were unloading tonnage at rates comparable to established ports. Storm damage in mid-June had destroyed the American Mulberry at Omaha Beach, but the British Mulberry at Arromanches continued operating. More importantly, the Americans had simply accelerated their beach landing techniques, compensating for the lost harbour through sheer volume of operations. Colonel von Lüttwitz first encountered detailed reports about American unloading operations in early July. An intelligence summary from Army Group B included interrogation reports from French civilians who had observed the beaches. They described scenes that seemed exaggerated, likely emotional responses rather than accurate observations. Trucks coming ashore every few minutes, supply dumps growing by the hour, American engineers building roads through the sand using wire mesh and gravel, allowing heavy vehicles to move inland without getting stuck. Von Lüttwitz filed the report but did not give it much weight. Civilian observers were notoriously unreliable about military operations. Their impressions were colored by fear, propaganda, and lack of technical understanding. Real assessment required hard data, not subjective impressions. The hard data arrived in late July in the form of captured American logistics documents. A Wehrmacht patrol overran a small American supply depot during a counterattack near Saint-Lô. Among the captured material were routine logistics reports, the mundane paperwork that tracked supplies through the military distribution system. These documents were forwarded to Berlin for analysis. What von Lüttwitz read in those papers forced a fundamental recalculation of American capabilities. The reports were bureaucratic, clinical, undeniable. They listed daily unloading figures for specific beach sectors. They documented fuel delivery rates. They tracked ammunition consumption and resupply. The numbers were internally consistent, cross-referenced with multiple reporting stations, clearly authentic. In a single day, July 15th, American forces had landed 12,000 tons of supplies across the Normandy beaches. Not through ports, not through established infrastructure, through beaches and temporary harbors built in hostile territory under German artillery fire, 12,000 tons was more than Army Group West received in a week. Von Lüttwitz studied the fuel delivery figures with particular attention. Fuel was the bloodstream of modern warfare. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, generators all depended on constant petroleum supply. Fuel was heavy, bulky, dangerous to transport and store. It was the most constraining logistics factor in any military operation. German forces fought perpetually with fuel shortages. Every offensive was planned around available fuel stocks. Every advance was limited by how far the fuel trucks could reach. The American First Army, according to captured documents, was receiving 400,000 gallons of gasoline daily through the Normandy lodgment. This figure represented just one of several American armies preparing for the breakout from the beachhead. The total American fuel delivery rate was exceeding 2 million gallons daily. For comparison, von Lüttwitz knew that the entire Wehrmacht on the Western Front consumed approximately 300,000 gallons of fuel per day across all services and purposes. The Americans were delivering more than 6 times that amount to a single theater, and the volume was increasing rather than decreasing as their build-up continued. The ammunition statistics were equally staggering. American artillery was firing support missions that consumed shells at rates German units could only achieve during major set-piece battles, and the Americans sustained this fire daily as routine practice. A single American infantry division, the captured reports showed, expended more artillery ammunition in 1 week than a German corps received in a month. This was not tactical excellence or technical superiority. This was industrial capacity translated directly to battlefield firepower. American artillery dominated not because of better guns or smarter tactics, but because they could afford to fire 10 shells for every one the Germans could spare. Precision became unnecessary when you could blanket target areas with high explosive until nothing survived. Von Lüttwitz requested additional intelligence on American logistics operations. What arrived over the following weeks came from multiple sources and painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Luftwaffe reconnaissance, limited though it was by Allied air superiority, photographed the Normandy lodgment repeatedly. The images showed supply dumps expanding in size and number. By early August, aerial photographs revealed ammunition stockpiles covering hundreds of acres. Vehicle parks containing thousands of trucks arranged in neat rows. Fuel storage facilities with hundreds of drums stacked 4 high. One photograph proved particularly illuminating. It showed a section of beach at low tide, taken from high altitude. Von Lüttwitz studied it with a magnifying glass, counting individual vehicles visible in the frame. He counted over 300 trucks in a single photograph, covering perhaps 1 square mile of beach area. If this was representative of the entire lodgment area, The Americans had tens of thousands of vehicles concentrated in Normandy. For comparison, the entire Army Group West had approximately 12,000 trucks assigned for all purposes. The Americans appeared to have more vehicles in their beach landing area than the German defenders possessed across all of France. Intelligence officers also analyzed patterns from signals intercepts. German radio intelligence units monitored American military communications, tracking radio traffic patterns and call signs. The volume of logistics-related signals was enormous. Supply requests, transport schedules, delivery confirmations, inventory reports. The Americans were broadcasting more logistics coordination traffic than the Wehrmacht generated for all operational purposes. This communications volume suggested an organization vastly larger and more complex than German logistics commands. American supply officers appeared to operate with levels of redundancy and parallel capability that would have been considered wasteful inefficiency by German standards. Multiple supply routes to the same destination, backup transportation plans, reserve stockpiles of reserves. It was logistical thinking on a scale German doctrine did not accommodate. Prisoner interrogations provided another stream of disturbing information. German intelligence systematically questioned captured American soldiers, seeking information about supply conditions and morale. The responses were remarkably consistent across rank and unit. Every prisoner described supply abundance that seemed impossible by German standards. American troops complained about the quality of field rations, but never about their availability. They discussed vehicle maintenance casually, mentioning that broken trucks were often abandoned rather than repaired because replacement was easier. They described ammunition being expended freely, with resupply taken for granted. Some mentioned seeing supplies being destroyed or left behind during advances because transportation capacity was insufficient to move everything, and new supplies were arriving constantly anyway. One captured American sergeant, interrogated in late July, made a comment that particularly struck the intelligence officer conducting the session. When asked about supply problems, the sergeant had laughed and said the only problem was finding storage space for everything that kept arriving. The interrogator included this in his report as an example of American propaganda indoctrination, the belief that prisoners were coached to demoralize their captors with false claims of abundance. Von Lüttwitz was not so sure. The comment fit too well with all the other evidence. It had the ring of authentic soldier humor rather than scripted propaganda. By late August, the accumulated intelligence painted an undeniable picture. The Americans had solved the logistics problem that should have been insoluble. They were supplying multi-army operations across 3,000 miles of ocean and through improvised beach facilities at rates exceeding what the Wehrmacht achieved with mature rail networks and short supply lines. This should have been impossible. Every principle of military logistics said it was impossible. Yet it was happening, documented in captured papers, visible in reconnaissance photographs, confirmed by prisoner accounts and signals intelligence. The mathematical impossibility had become operational reality, and German planners had to understand how. The answer lay in American industrial capacity, but not just in the crude sense of producing more equipment. It lay in a systematic approach to logistics that treated the supply chain itself as a weapon system, something to be engineered, optimized, and resourced with the same priority as divisions and air wings. The Americans had fundamentally reimagined military logistics for industrial warfare at transcontinental scale. Von Lüttwitz began studying captured American technical manuals and logistics documents with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. These mundane papers revealed a logistics philosophy entirely different from German practice. The American system was built on abundance rather than efficiency, on redundancy rather than precision, on standardization rather than customization. Where German logistics sought to minimize waste through careful calculation of needs, American logistics simply overwhelmed requirements with massive oversupply. Where German planners carefully routed supplies through established channels to avoid duplication, American planners created parallel supply systems so that failure of one route would not disrupt operations. Where German doctrine emphasized preserving resources through careful management, American practice treated supplies as essentially unlimited, to be consumed freely because more was always coming. This was not stupidity or waste. It was a different model of warfare, one that reflected America's unique advantages and constraints. Fighting at transcontinental distances with enormous industrial capacity but limited time, America had chosen to win through material overwhelming rather than tactical elegance. It was brute force logistics, and it was devastatingly effective. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Liberty Ship program exemplified this approach. Von Lüttwitz had received intelligence reports about these vessels in late 1943, when German naval intelligence began tracking their production. The reports seemed exaggerated, claiming that American shipyards were building 10,000-ton cargo vessels in an average of 42 days from keel laying to launch. German naval architects insisted this was impossible. Ship construction was methodical work requiring months. The claims had to be propaganda or accounting tricks, perhaps counting completion time from when most of the ship was already built. No shipyard in history had produced ocean-going vessels at such rates, but the intelligence kept arriving, and it was consistent. Multiple sources confirmed the Liberty Ship program. German agents in neutral Portugal photographed American Liberty ships in harbor. U-boat commanders reported attacking convoys composed primarily of similar-looking vessels. Captured American merchant mariners confirmed serving on Liberty ships built in weeks rather than months. The scale of production was undeniable. By 1944, American shipyards had produced over 2,500 Liberty ships. They were launching 3 ships per day at peak production. This single program was producing more cargo capacity monthly than existed in most national merchant fleets. The implications for transatlantic supply were devastating for German strategy. The U-boat campaign had been Germany's answer to American industrial production. Sink the ships faster than they could be built, and American capacity would be irrelevant because it could not reach Europe. Through 1942 and into early 1943, this strategy showed promise. U-boats were sinking Allied shipping at rates that seemed unsustainable, but the Liberty ships changed the mathematics. American shipyards were producing cargo vessels faster than U-boats could sink them, often by factors of 3 to 1 or more. Even successful U-boat patrols that sank multiple ships barely dented the growing Allied merchant fleet. By 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was mathematically lost. Germany simply could not sink ships fast enough to prevent American industrial output from reaching Europe. Von Lüttwitz studied the Liberty ship statistics with the grim fascination of a man watching his own execution unfold in slow motion. Each ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo. 3 ships daily meant 30,000 tons of cargo capacity added to the Allied merchant fleet every day. In a month, that was 900,000 tons of new capacity. In a year, over 10 million tons. The entire German merchant fleet, before the war, totaled approximately 4 million tons. America was building more than twice Germany's pre-war merchant capacity every year, just through the Liberty ship program alone. This did not count other American shipbuilding, or British construction, or vessels acquired from other Allied nations. The Atlantic Ocean, which German strategy depended on as a barrier protecting the Reich from American power, had become a highway. An endless stream of ships carried the output of American factories to Europe: tanks, trucks, artillery, ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, construction equipment, medical supplies, everything an army needed to fight. The material flowed across the ocean in quantities that dwarfed anything Germany could produce domestically or capture from occupied territories. And once that material reached Europe, the Americans had developed logistics systems to move it inland with similar overwhelming capacity. This was where the captured documents from Normandy proved most revealing. They showed not just the quantity of supplies being landed, but the systematic organization that made such quantities usable. The Red Ball Express, established in late August to supply the breakout from Normandy, exemplified American logistics philosophy. Von Lüttwitz first learned about this operation through signals intelligence. German radio monitoring stations detected massive increases in American logistics communications along certain French roads. The traffic patterns suggested thousands of vehicles moving in continuous streams. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed what signals intelligence indicated. Photographs showed roads filled with American trucks in endless convoys, headlights visible even from high altitude during night photography. The Americans had established one-way truck routes running continuously from Normandy to the advancing front, operating 24 hours a day. Over 6,000 trucks participated at peak operations, moving 12,000 tons of supplies daily. Von Lüttwitz calculated what this meant in practical terms. 12,000 tons daily through a single emergency supply route. The entire Wehrmacht in France received approximately 20,000 tons of supplies daily through established rail networks and road transport across short distances from German supply bases. The Americans were moving more than half that total through one improvised truck convoy system operating across hundreds of miles of contested territory. The Red Ball Express was not even the primary American supply system. It was an emergency measure, implemented when rapid advances temporarily outran conventional supply chains. Yet this backup emergency system exceeded German logistics capacity across an entire theatre. When the Red Ball stood down in November as ports came online and rail networks were restored, the Americans simply transitioned to even more efficient distribution methods. The scope of American truck production explained how such operations were possible. Von Lüttwitz received intelligence estimates of American motor vehicle production in September 1944. The figures came from multiple sources, including pre-war trade statistics, agent reports from neutral countries, analysis of captured vehicle serial numbers, and technical intelligence from examination of American equipment. The United States had produced approximately 625,000 trucks in 1943. This single year's production exceeded the total number of trucks in the entire Wehrmacht at the start of the war. German truck production for 1943, by comparison, totaled approximately 100,000 vehicles, and that figure had to serve both military and essential civilian needs. American production in 1944 was projected to exceed 700,000 trucks. They were building trucks at rates 7 times greater than German production. More disturbingly, American trucks were standardized to a degree German industry had never achieved. The Deuce and a Half, the 2.5-ton GMC truck that formed the backbone of American logistics, was produced at 11 different facilities by multiple manufacturers using interchangeable parts. This standardization meant that maintenance was simplified, spare parts were universally compatible, and replacement vehicles could come from any factory. When an American truck broke down, drivers could cannibalize parts from any other truck of the same model. When German vehicles broke down, they often required specific parts from specific manufacturers, which had to be requisitioned through supply channels and might take weeks to arrive if they arrived at all. The Wehrmacht's motor transport fleet was a logistical nightmare of different models, different manufacturers, different parts. German forces used captured French trucks, Czech trucks, Polish trucks, Russian trucks, each requiring unique maintenance expertise and dedicated parts supplies. The Americans used American trucks, millions of them, all functionally identical. This was industrial warfare at scale, not just producing more equipment, but producing it in ways that simplified logistics rather than complicating it. The American military had clearly learned lessons from their automotive industry, applying mass production principles to military logistics. The result was a force that could move and supply itself with unprecedented efficiency. Vehicle production was only part of the story. Fuel supply represented an even more fundamental advantage. Von Lüttwitz knew from personal experience that fuel shortages constrained every German military operation. The Reich produced synthetic fuel from coal through the Fischer-Tropsch process, a technologically impressive but resource-intensive program. Germany also imported oil from Romanian fields, which required maintaining control of the Balkans and protecting vulnerable supply lines. Total German fuel production in 1944, including both synthetic production and Romanian imports, was estimated at approximately 50 million barrels annually. This had to serve all military operations across all fronts, plus essential civilian and industrial needs. German forces operated under constant fuel rationing. Tanks sat idle, waiting for fuel allocations. Trucks were saved for essential missions. Training flights were curtailed to conserve aviation fuel. American petroleum production in 1944 exceeded 1.4 billion barrels. The United States produced more oil than the rest of the world combined, including all Allied and Axis powers. American fuel production was roughly 30 times greater than German capacity. This disparity translated directly to battlefield mobility. American forces never fought under fuel constraints. They could move vehicles freely, run generators constantly, conduct training with live fuel consumption. Intelligence reports from interrogated American prisoners consistently mentioned fuel abundance. Vehicles were sometimes operated for minor convenience missions that German forces would have conducted on foot. Fuel was used for heating, for powering electric generators for entertainment equipment, for essentially unlimited purposes. During the Allied advance across France in August and September 1944, American armies temporarily outran their fuel supply lines. This created brief periods where American advances halted due to fuel shortages, demonstrating that even American logistics had physical limits. German commanders initially hoped these pauses indicated that Allied supply lines were finally breaking under their own weight. But the pauses lasted only days. Emergency air supply operations delivered fuel directly to forward units. Engineers laid temporary pipelines at extraordinary speed. The Red Ball Express maximized its delivery rates. Within 72 hours of halting, American armies were moving again with full fuel stocks. What should have been a logistics collapse became merely a temporary inconvenience. The pipeline construction particularly impressed German intelligence analysts. The Americans had laid fuel pipelines from the Normandy beaches to forward supply depots at speeds that violated every German understanding of pipeline construction timelines. Traditional pipeline laying was methodical work, requiring surveys, excavation, careful welding, pressure testing. It took months to construct pipelines covering the distances the Americans were achieving in weeks. Operation Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean, represented the most ambitious version of this approach. The British had constructed pipelines running under the English Channel from Britain to France, pumping fuel directly across the water. This eliminated the need to ship fuel in tankers and barrels, creating a continuous flow of petroleum to the continent. The engineering required to lay pipelines on the ocean floor under wartime conditions seemed fantastical, yet intelligence confirmed it was operational. German engineers, when briefed on Pluto, were skeptical that such pipelines could function reliably. The technical challenges of maintaining pressure, preventing leaks, protecting underwater lines from damage, all seemed insurmountable. Yet the fuel kept flowing. By late 1944, the pipeline network in France extended over 400 miles, pumping millions of gallons to supply depots that fed the advancing armies. Von Lüttwitz tried to imagine German industry attempting similar projects. The resources required, the engineering expertise, the construction equipment, the time needed, all exceeded what Germany could muster, even if fuel shortages were not constraining every operation. The Americans were not just outproducing Germany in weapons. They were building entirely new categories of military infrastructure that German planning had never contemplated. The capture of Antwerp in early September should have been Germany's salvation. Antwerp was Europe's second-largest port, with extensive dock facilities and direct rail connections to Germany. If the port could be held unusable or destroyed, American logistics would be forced to continue operating through beaches and limited facilities. The supply constraint that was supposed to limit Allied operations might finally materialize. German forces fought desperately to hold the Scheldt estuary approaches to Antwerp, keeping the port unusable even after the city itself fell. For over 2 months, Antwerp's magnificent facilities sat idle while German forces controlled the waterways leading to it. American supplies continued flowing through beaches and the British Mulberry Harbour at reduced but still substantial rates. Then, in late November, Canadian forces cleared the Scheldt after bitter fighting. Antwerp opened to Allied shipping. Von Lüttwitz received the first intelligence reports about Antwerp's operations in early December. The tonnage figures were staggering beyond anything he had seen before. Within weeks of opening, Antwerp was handling over 20,000 tons of supplies daily. By January 1945, that figure would exceed 40,000 tons per day. A single port was unloading more supplies in one day than the entire Wehrmacht received in a week. The docks operated around the clock. Liberty ships queued in the harbour, waiting for berths. Cranes moved continuously. Railway cars carried supplies inland in endless trains. The Americans had assigned over 25,000 personnel to port operations at Antwerp alone. That was more people than served in entire German logistics commands. These troops operated specialized equipment, drove thousands of vehicles, managed warehouses covering square miles. They had transformed Antwerp into the largest logistics hub in military history, handling tonnages that exceeded major commercial ports in peacetime. German V-weapons, the Von flying bombs and V-2 rockets, were directed against Antwerp in desperation. If the port could be disrupted, destroyed, rendered unusable, perhaps Allied logistics would finally face the constraints that German planners had always predicted. From October 1944 through March 1945, over 8,000 V-weapons were launched at Antwerp and its approaches. The attacks killed thousands of civilians and military personnel. They destroyed buildings and equipment. They created terror and disruption. But they did not stop the port operations. Damaged facilities were repaired faster than they could be destroyed. Lost equipment was replaced immediately from vast supply stocks. The tonnage continued flowing with barely measurable interruption. Von Lüttwitz studied the V-weapon campaign results with bitter recognition. Germany was expending its most advanced weapons, each V-2 costing as much as a fighter aircraft, each Von representing substantial resources. Thousands of these weapons were being launched at targets where they achieved tactical destruction but no strategic effect. The Americans simply absorbed the damage through redundancy and rapid repair, capabilities that made precision attacks irrelevant. This was the fundamental difference between German and American approaches to warfare. German doctrine emphasized precision, efficiency, making every resource count because resources were limited. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming abundance, making precision unnecessary because resources were essentially unlimited. When these philosophies collided, abundance defeated precision through sheer mathematics. The prisoner interrogations from late 1944 revealed how completely American supply superiority had penetrated to the lowest levels. Captured German soldiers consistently reported that American forces possessed equipment and supplies in quantities that seemed wasteful. Ammunition was fired freely. Vehicles were abandoned after minor damage. Food was thrown away. Medical supplies were available in abundance. One interrogation report particularly struck von Lüttwitz. A German NCO captured in the Ardennes offensive described being held in an American supply depot before transport to a rear area prison camp. "The supplies I saw there," the man stated, "exceeded everything in our entire division. They had warehouses full of rations, fuel drums stacked higher than buildings, medical supplies we have not seen in Germany for 2 years. The guard told me this was a small depot, that there were dozens larger. The interrogator had noted this as possible exaggeration, but von Lüttwitz believed it was accurate. Every piece of intelligence confirmed the same pattern. The Americans operated in an environment of supply abundance that made German scarcity look medieval by comparison. Food represented another area of overwhelming disparity. German rations had been steadily declining in quality and quantity throughout the war. By late 1944, German soldiers received reduced rations that barely met caloric requirements. Meat was scarce, fresh vegetables were rare, coffee was ersatz, made from roasted grains rather than actual coffee beans. Chocolate was a distant memory. American K-rations, by comparison, provided 2,800 calories daily, with meat, chocolate, cigarettes, and instant coffee. These were field rations, designed for combat conditions, yet they exceeded what German soldiers received in garrison. Captured American supply depots contained candy, Coca-Cola, cigarettes in enormous quantities. Items that were luxuries in Germany were routine in American military supply. This mattered beyond simple morale. Properly fed soldiers fought better, moved faster, recovered from exertion more quickly. American troops were physically larger and healthier on average than German soldiers by late 1944, fed on rations that provided complete nutrition rather than bare subsistence. The disparity in diet translated to disparity in combat effectiveness. Medical supplies told the same story. American combat medicine included sulfur drugs, penicillin, plasma for blood transfusions, morphine for pain management, advanced surgical equipment. German combat medicine increasingly relied on whatever could be improvised. Penicillin was unavailable. Blood plasma was scarce. Many wounded died from infections that American medicine could have prevented with routine treatment. Von Lüttwitz studied intelligence reports about American medical logistics with the fascination of observing an entirely different civilization. The Americans evacuated wounded by air, flying casualties from front lines to sophisticated hospital facilities in hours. They performed complex surgeries in forward surgical hospitals, equipped better than many German civilian hospitals. They maintained medical supply stocks that ensured every medic, every aid station, every hospital had what it needed. German medical services operated under constant shortage. Morphine was rationed. Bandages were washed and reused. Surgical equipment was used until it broke, then improvised replacements were fabricated. The contrast between American medical abundance and German medical scarcity directly affected survival rates. American wounded had better chances of survival than German wounded with similar injuries, not because American doctors were more skilled, but because they had the supplies and facilities to provide proper treatment. By December 1944, von Lüttwitz had assembled a comprehensive picture of American logistics superiority. It was not one factor, but a combination of overwhelming advantages across every category. Industrial production exceeded German capacity by factors of 3 to 5 in most categories. Transportation capacity, both oceanic and land-based, was orders of magnitude greater. Fuel availability was essentially unlimited compared to German constraints. Port operations handled tonnages that German logistics officers would have considered impossible. Most fundamentally, the Americans had created logistics systems specifically designed for warfare at transcontinental scale. They had engineered solutions to problems that German doctrine did not even recognize as solvable. Artificial harbors, emergency truck convoy systems, underwater fuel pipelines, air freight of supplies in quantities normally shipped by rail, all represented logistics innovation, driven by necessity and enabled by industrial capacity. Von Lüttwitz prepared a comprehensive report for the High Command in mid-December 1944. The report was clinical, mathematical, undeniable in its conclusions. He compared German logistics capacity to American output across every measurable category: fuel production, vehicle availability, ammunition supply, food quality, medical capabilities, port operations, transportation efficiency. Every comparison told the same story. Germany was being outproduced, outmoved, outsupplied by margins that made military victory impossible regardless of tactical performance. The Wehrmacht could continue winning individual battles through superior tactics and defensive advantages. But campaigns would be lost through attrition because the Americans could absorb losses and continue fighting while German strength declined inexorably. The report included detailed projections. If current trends continued, American logistics superiority would enable them to maintain offensive operations indefinitely, while German capabilities degraded under multiple pressures. Allied bombing disrupted German production and transportation. Fuel shortages would become critical as Romanian oil fields were lost. Transportation networks would collapse under combined effects of bombing, fuel shortage, and lack of maintenance. Food supplies would decline as agricultural areas were lost and transportation failed. The mathematics led to inescapable conclusions. Germany faced an enemy that could not be defeated through military means, given the existing logistics balance. The Americans were not just winning through better strategy or tactics. They were winning through systematic application of overwhelming industrial and logistics capacity. No amount of German courage, skill, or tactical brilliance could overcome such fundamental material disadvantage. Von Lüttwitz expected his report to be received seriously, if not welcomed. The intelligence was solid, The analysis was professional. The conclusions followed logically from verified data. He understood that the findings were unwelcome, that they contradicted official optimism about victory through willpower and superior German fighting spirit. But he believed that rational leaders would accept rational analysis and adjust strategy accordingly. What he encountered was rejection so complete it bordered on psychological denial. The High Command could not accept that American logistics superiority determined the war's outcome. They cited German tactical victories, superior weapons like the Tiger tank and Me-262 jet, defensive advantages of fortified positions. They insisted that German soldiers were better trained, more experienced, more ideologically committed than American troops. They argued that American supply abundance was waste and inefficiency rather than strength. They claimed that logistical tail-heavy American forces would collapse under their own weight when pushed hard enough. They pointed to temporary American supply shortages in September as proof that Allied logistics were fragile. They convinced themselves that willpower and fighting spirit would overcome material disadvantage. Hitler personally dismissed von Lüttwitz's conclusions as defeatist. In a staff meeting in late December, he launched into one of his characteristic monologues about how German determination had overcome material disadvantage before and would do so again. He cited Frederick the Great's victories when outnumbered, Napoleon's early campaigns, his own rise to power against opposition. History proved, he insisted, that will could defeat mere numbers. Von Lüttwitz was not invited to respond. His report was filed and ignored. The German High Command would continue fighting based on hope and ideology rather than material analysis. The mathematics of defeat were clear to professional logisticians, but invisible to leadership, unwilling to accept unwelcome reality. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.